We started CGI because after a lifetime of attending meetings where people just talked about big problems and then went home, I thought we should have a meeting where everyone who participated was asked to commit to actually doing something about those problems. We'd bring together a community of doers from a broad cross-section of society, public sector, the private sector, and big and small NGOs from all around the world. And then we'd ask everyone to publicly commit to specific action to address our biggest challenges. All we asked was that everybody try to do something. It turned out there was a hunger for the chance to create change and to do it with partners who might otherwise never have had the chance to work together. And because of that, there have now been more than 4,000 commitments to action that have improved the lives of nearly 500 million people in more than 180 countries around the world.
Please join in welcoming to the stage Ashley Judd.
Good afternoon. It's so good to be with you. I am going to record myself because I say incendiary things and I want to make sure that they're caught accurately. Yeah, I knew I was somebody when Karl Rove made an attack video about me, and then since then we've become buddies. Okay. A man molested me for the first time that I remember when I was 7 years old. I talk about violence, so please take care of yourselves, by the way. He felt entitled to my small body, and as he assaulted me, one of my loose teeth in my mouth wiggled. I say remember because our brains are supremely fabulous organisms, and we are able to conceal from our conscious minds that which is unendurable. A man tried to drag me from an aisle in a Kmart when I was in the 8th grade. I had on my green and gold cheerleading uniform. For what nefarious purpose I know not, but I managed to struggle and get away from him. I say I don't remember that one. He is still a registered sex offender in Rutherford County, Tennessee, from the last I hear from his daughter. When I was 14, it was organized for me by a modeling agency here in New York to go to Tokyo to work for the summer as an unescorted minor. On my first day at the modeling agency, I was told by the adults to take off all my clothes and walk around in my kitty underpants and little bra. And that summer was, in fact, one of commercial sexual exploitation where men of all kinds consumed my adolescent body, ranging from the agency head who molested me to 2 rapes and so on and so on and so on. Children are not for sex, and women's vaginas should not be sites of violence. In every circle of women with whom I've ever sat around the world, nearly all of us have experienced male entitlement to our bodies in some form, the covert small humiliations and grave bodily damage. On the set of a film I just made, the young woman said to me, oh, as if it were her inevitable possession and rite of passage, my rape was at 12. And coincidentally, 12 to 15 is the age of entry into prostitution in the United States. And to be clear, there is no such thing as a child prostitute. They are survivors of commercial sexual violence, and it is serial body invasion and paid rape. This should not be controversial, although at times it is. Because the vagina, the mouth, and the anus are not workplaces, and capitalism does not reach to our orifices. And normalizing the male purchase of bodies, who are often the most vulnerable among us, pushed into motel rooms and cars by intersecting oppressions, especially for Black trans women, is what sex buying teaches. Decriminalize all folks trapped in the sex trade, and hold accountable sex buyers, pimping, and brothel keeping. I'd love to talk about that more at another time. The ubiquity and pervasiveness of male sexual violence constrains our world in every frontier of human development and in every sector of economic and geopolitical progress. Peace and security are simply impossible with this violence, and as is its inverse, gender equity. And what does this harm look like? It looks like my sisters in Madagascar pooling their meager resources to buy empty sacks of rice to string up to make provisional tents under which they lay their bodies down on sidewalks while their husbands pimp them holding their infants, and scant money changes hands for this pain. It looks like the documented explosion of men's use of pornography during the global pandemic lockdown. And in a recently published rigorous study, a third of all college women responded that a man had choked them in their last sexual encounter, not over their sexual careers in college, but in their last encounter. And of course, choking is de rigueur in pornography. And in the intimate partner violence assessment, it is the last move before homicide. It looks like my chosen niece, while I was trying to watch Kentucky basketball, bringing up pornography and how the boys in school insist that her peers at the age of 14 perform the sex acts they've learned in violent, racist, and misogynistic pornography. Older women are abused too. In the Luvungi rapes in the DRC, as armed militia raided a village, a woman cried, "You are my grandson. Get off of me." What is the solution? Ending male entitlement to female bodies. It is that simple, and it is that complex. And I love you, men, and I am with you, and you have to change. And you have to be supported and understood and incentivized as you do so. The ecosystems that enable this behavior must be dismantled, whether it's the, so more subtle, like girls not having bathrooms, so when they start their periods, they drop out of schools and can't access education, which we all know is a catapult to female empowerment. And the puzzling, yet seemingly universal report that when girls and women go to latrines in IDP and refugee camps, men assault them. I don't know what that's about. The apologists and those who double down on excuses and victim blaming must now be those who disrupt and hold their peers accountable. And we must learn the science behind tonic immobility and normalize that when being attacked, a body can go limp and become compliant to save itself. It is dismantling the naturalistic fallacy and following the hard science, which a naturalistic fallacy erroneously posits that because something is, it ought to be. Let's look to our closest living relatives, the bonobos. When they look at us, they see a closer relative than a gorilla. They are male-free, male sexual coercion-free, and free from male dominance. If a female is solicited for a copulation and she denies, she is not retaliated against. Females have reproductive autonomy. And they show that male dominance and male sexual coercion is not evolutionarily inevitable. And still some say boys will be boys, but we say here today that we love them and they will be held accountable for their actions, their attitudes, their sins of omission. And frankly, I'm fed up with the emphasis being on building resilience in girls and women because we got to look upstream and see from whence this need for resilience comes. Now, it seems like you're with me, but I kind of assumed this is the part where I've lost everybody and the media calls me a man-hater, and of course my social media goes bananas with rape and death threats. I'm used to that. And this will be what it will be because we're here to tell the truth. This is telling truth to patriarchy, just like when I lost a big job after the Women's March. I quoted the president. He said it. He got elected. I quoted him. I got fired and lost income that would have changed my life. Male sexual violence is the up with which we will not put, and for me, it's just the hill on which I'm willing to die. I've seen too much agony, too many shattered souls, and too many women controlled and held back as farmers, as civil servants, as contributors to their community because they couldn't plan and space the births of their children because when they introduce family planning, they get beaten, or used for household labor and fetching water and cooking and cleaning while their sons eat more than they do. Where's the hope? With Jackson Katz, who's here and speaking to you after I, and with men like him who use evidence-based strategies to help men change their behavior and become upstanders instead of bystanders. It is with grassroots NGOs that help train women to run for office all over the world, and the hope is women's collectives like Apne App Worldwide, which is based on Gandhian principles and allows girls and women to access their natural inner self-efficacy and agency, to exit intergenerational prostitution. And I've been in the brothels in Bihar and in Calcutta and Mumbai and Delhi and seen women who exited, but their homes were burned down by their male relatives because they still wanted to sell them. But they got out because they know this is the freedom struggle for which we are willing to risk everything. Hope is ni una menos, Hope is ni una menos. The radical feminist movement in Argentina that is spreading to Chile and the whole area, which decries with ferocity and passion that a woman is murdered every 32 hours in Argentina and 800,000 in the area are dead as a result of femicide. In closing, let's go to Zatari refugee camp in Jordan, where a beautiful 12-year-old Syrian refugee has asked me to braid her hair, which lacks luster from the hardship of her life and malnutrition. She's already been used by men as a commodity for sex, and she jumped off a balcony because she could no longer endure what was being done to her small body. Both her legs broke. But she reached to me, held my hands, and struggled to stand up to show me that she could stand on her own 2 feet. And that is what we are here to do, to tell the truth like she was telling the truth and to stand. So join her and me in telling the truth about male sexual violence. Tell it in your workplaces, tell it on the streets, tell it in public transportation. Tell it in your bedrooms. Thank you. Peace be with you.
Please welcome Pedro de Paula.
Good morning to everyone here. My name is Pedro de Paula. I run the Brazil office of Vital Strategies. We are a global health organization focusing on promoting equitable public health systems throughout the world. And today, I want to talk to you why I believe we need early warning and intervention to stop gender-based violence and how public health data can help us in doing so. So let me tell you about Alice. Alice, a 34-year-old woman, died in a hit and run while walking in the streets in Brazil. Her death was registered as impact of a motor vehicle, unknown intent. However, witnesses told us that she was hit not once, but twice, and the driver was her ex-boyfriend. That wasn't an accident. The Ministry of Health also conducted investigation around Alice's case. Public health data showed that she had sought help at primary health care providers several times in the months before her death. In one of these cases, she mentioned that she had been subject to violence from her boyfriend. She then left the aggressor. That did not stop him. In March 2016, he used his car to hit Alice, murdering her. Her death was in reality a violent, intentional assault. More could have been done to save Alice and millions of other women. Health systems can play an important role in preventing this type of deaths. And that's why, at Vital Strategies, we're now announcing a commitment to action to address gender-based violence in Brazil and around the world. We're using linguistic intelligence to find patterns of violence in medical records, revealing otherwise invisible victims. By using carefully designed AI, we can create public health tools that enable the identification of women most at risk to suffering from these violences. Combining different public health data sets allows us to identify patterns and risk factors for violence, and in doing so, we can equip authorities to act early and prevent severe injuries and deaths. These powerful tools can inform policymakers and health teams to better address violence and harm. With this type of data innovation, perhaps Alice and thousands or millions of other women in Brazil, in the US, and around the world would still be alive today. Please visit datatostopgbv.org to learn more about our work and to join us in this cause. Thank you very much.
Please welcome to the stage Felicia Marie Knoll and Dr. Flavia Bustreo.
Good morning still and almost good afternoon. My name is Felicia Marie Knoll, and I have the honor of co-chairing with my colleague and friend, Dr. Flavia Bustreo, the Lancet Commission on Gender-Based Violence and Maltreatment of Young People that's based at the University of Miami. The pandemic of violence against women and children and gender-based violence constitutes a pervasive, a pernicious, and a persistent threat to global health, to educational attainment, to poverty alleviation, and to gender equality. None other than Ashley Judd has told us exactly what this means. More than a third, that's 1 in 3, or 1 billion women and girls experience intimate partner violence or non-partner physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. Further, nearly a quarter of all adults worldwide report physical abuse as children, and the lifetime prevalence of childhood sexual abuse among girls is at least 1 in 5, and for boys, 1 in 10. Yet the risks and the costs of violence against women and children have been minimized, and we would say even ignored in global health. We are a community of researchers, advocates, survivors, and loved ones of survivors. And for me, this is a very personal commitment as the mother of a young survivor. We together choose to partner with and harness the impressive power of the world's leading medical journal, The Lancet, to do our part to quell the silence. We commit to creating new data and evidence through an innovative, intersectoral, interdisciplinary approach. Our commission includes over 60 researchers, advocates, and survivors from all around the world, all world regions. And we are most honored to be able to count on Dr. Chelsea Clinton as one of our most engaged commissioners, a leader in public and global health. We will publish a path-breaking report in 2025 on the global response to violence, complete with this new evidence and concrete policy and research recommendations. But being able to catapult our work through this CGI commitment means a huge difference. It's the difference between a report that will be read and one that will garner the global action and advocacy that is essential to achieve the only conceivable outcome for our world, and that outcome is zero. A world without violence against women and children. Thank you very much.
Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Chelsea Clinton, Jackson Katz, Beverly Tillery, and Kalpana Vishwanath.
Yes, I think channeling my dear friend Felicia, it is kind of awkward. Do I say good morning again or good afternoon? So we're sort of at the transition. It is, I think, really with profound kind of gratitude, humility, and I hope growing awareness that I just want to say thank you to Ashley for her just indefatigable leadership and courage. And she certainly epitomizes what it means to keep going. And I think is very much, therefore, then an example to us all. So want to kind of jump right in because we never have as much time as I wish we would. And admittedly, I want to start with the person who is furthest from me, if that's not kind of too awkward a kind of panel dynamic. Because I think kind of what you've done with your kind of organization, Save It Pen, did I say it correctly? Okay, good, I practiced. I think is really quite extraordinary. And so I hope that we can maybe talk about what compelled you to start it, kind of what you've learned kind of through your work and where you envision it going and the impact you hope to have.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. And thank you, Ashley, for that wonderful keynote. I'm really delighted to be here. I must thank CGI for giving me this opportunity. So Safety Pin is an organization which is works with technology and data to address violence and sexual harassment and fear in public places. We had a lot of work around domestic violence, sexual harassment at the workplace, but we also realized that while moving around the city, girls and women face a lot of violence and fear. And this is a very interesting thing that in 2016, Cornell University did a study in 16 countries, and they found that over 80% of women faced their first sexual harassment in public spaces before the age of 12. Now, when this happens, what happens is your entire outlook changes. You sort of look at the city with a lens of fear. And I think fear determines so much of our lives that I think men don't understand that, you know? I mean, if it's late at night, you're a little scared. If you go to a new city, you're a little scared. If you're walking in a neighborhood that you don't know people, you feel scared. And really, that was what motivated me to take up this work and saying, how do we address the fear? Not just the violence. And also sexual harassment in public places is one of the most underreported crimes, because you're walking on the street and someone just touches your butt or pinches your breast, and what are you going to do? Are you going to go to the police with that? He's gone before you even know. So we need to do, that's why the study was important, because it brought out the extent of the problem. So what we do at Safety Pin is that we took, so Safety Pin, I don't know if you know, is a little pin that you use to, put things together. But one of the reasons we took the name Safety Pin is in India, when I was in college, we used to actually carry around safety pins in crowded buses to actually just poke a person who came too close by. So it actually has a resonance. But I found that in many Latin American countries and African countries, they also have used the safety pin similarly. So we are an app and a set of apps and tools to collect data, to get women to share where they feel unsafe, why they feel unsafe, and we map that data together and give it to the city governments, the police, the transport departments, because we believe that making cities safe is not the work of women. We cannot keep carrying the burden of making things safer and better. I think Hillary Clinton this morning said that, we are not going to carry this burden forever. So what we do is now we're 10 years old this year, and we work in over nearly 35 cities across the world in 12 countries, and we collect data from the experiences of women and girls in low-income neighborhoods, in universities, and then we take that data to governments and say, now you make the changes. Fix the lights, make the public transport better, make sure parks are safe so girls can run, make sure public toilets, that's a big issue. Public toilets are a feminist issue. I think we have to recognize that, And that's where we are now, and we want to work with more and more cities. The app is a free app. It's called My Safety Pin. Do download it and take a look, because we're trying to get a platform where women's voices, girls' voices, in fact, a lot of men also use our platform because they like to share the experience of the women in their vicinity. So, and we have made some we have more than, I think, 1 million data points around the world in cities about what makes you, a woman or a girl, feel unsafe. Is it the lack of lighting? Is it the lack of a good walk path, etc.? So really, we believe that data is what is going to give that evidence for governments to make the change.
And to hold them accountable when they don't. Jackson, you have been a leader in kind of doing the work that Kapana referenced, and certainly, as did my mother, and Ashley kind of celebrated you for, which is to reframe all of kind of these conversations as men's issues, that we do need to be kind of raising our boys into kind of a different type of man than what historically, although thank you, Ashley, for calling out, not necessarily biologically, has been privileged and protected. And you also have been, I think, quite keen in saying it's not only a man's issue, it's also a leadership issue. And so I wonder if you could share kind of how you came to what certainly seems self-evident, and kind of what you really kind of see now in your work of trying to convince more people, men and women alike, that we need to be more focused in kind of building responsible men rather than necessarily resilient girls.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a great opportunity, and Ashley's statements, all of them, both earlier and just now, are just like always right on point. And I'll echo Ashley's preamble where she said something like, I'm going to talk honestly and say some things because we have big problems in the world. Obviously, we all know that we have big problems, and we need more men who are willing to just say out loud that this is a men's issue. Men's violence against women has long been one of the great tragedies of the human species. Women's leadership in a multiracial, multi-ethnic sense, global north, global south, has been incredible and transformative in world historical terms for a long time, and will continue to be so. But men's leadership has been absent or very limited. Men have not met the moment. We need to start calling men in, as opposed to calling them out, but calling them in. And we need to start saying to men in positions of institutional leadership, political leadership, cultural leadership, at all levels, and I'm including presidents of the United States, as well as 15-year-old boys. We need men who have some integrity and some moral integrity, and especially if they have a platform, to those whom much is given, much is expected. Men with a platform, men who are in positions of leadership, need to be speaking out and saying the things that I'm saying, so that it's not unusual to hear a man say the things that I say. And I've been doing this work for a long time, traveling all over the world, and people say to me, oh my God, I never heard a man say this. This is pathetic in 2023 that people haven't heard a man say that men's violence against women is a men's issue. And that's why it's a leadership issue, because we need more men who have the courage and the strength to say, I don't care if other men are going to say that I'm hating on men, or that I'm soft, or a soy boy, or a virtue signaler, all the kind of idiocy that men and young men hear online and offline, if they have the chutzpah to just tell the truth, okay? So that's why I think this is a men's issue. And by the way, one of the aspects of this, and I'm talking fast both because I'm from Boston and because time is
Wait, people from Boston talk faster than New Yorkers? I don't know about that.
I'm in New York, and my mother's from New York, so I always, invoke my mother's Bronx roots when I'm in New York. But the language that we use to talk about this subject is part of the problem. So we say how many women were raped last year rather than how many men raped women. We say how many girls were sexually harassed rather than how many boys sexually harassed girls. We say how many teenage girls got pregnant rather than how many men and boys impregnated teenage girls. In each case, the use of passive language has a very powerful political effect. The political effect is the shift in focus off of the group with more power onto the group with less. This is not a coincidence. It's not sloppy thinking. It's how power works, through stealth or invisibility, or the shifting of accountability off of itself. And so one of the things that those of us who want to change the paradigm, who want to make big impact, we need to do is we need to make visible what has been rendered invisible, by saying honestly and using active language. And I have to say, I know that many women don't use active language because they know that there's so much pushback from men and hostility from men, both on an interpersonal level, women not wanting to be honest, but also in the public space. That's why men need to be saying some of these things. We need adult men especially. We shouldn't put this on the shoulders of boys and young men at university or college. I mean, yes, we want them to step up, but the real leadership has to take place at the higher levels of adult men, fathers, coaches, teachers, CEOs of companies, executive directors of agencies, political leaders. Last thing, I just want to make sure I say this, the growing sort of trend towards violence, men's violence towards women in political leadership all over the world is it's a front and center. It's like it's a 5-alarm fire. We need more men who are willing to say to other men and organizations and movements, not in my name, not in my name. We need to support women's leadership, especially feminist women's leadership, not be silent when other men are doing that. And by the way, there's all kinds of connections between the rise of the right and fascism in this country and in Europe and misogyny, and that has to be lifted up and talked about, because the movements, the right-wing populist movements, are not just racist movements, they're that, and anti-immigration movements, they are that, but they're also men's response to and anger about feminism and the LGBTQ revolutions that are displacing heteronormative men's cultural centrality and leadership in the family and in the society. And when men who are not on board with those right-wing sort of backlash kind of sentiments, in other words, progressive men, men who are supportive of women, we can't be silently supporting women. We need to do that privately, but we need to do it publicly from the biggest stage as possible. I hope next year at CGI, at the main stage, there's men on this stage talking about men's violence against women as a men's issue and gender equality and gender justice as men's issues.
Amen. Beverly, I'm so, grateful that Jackson called out, also the rising violence against members of the LGBTQI+ community, which we unfortunately see here in our city, and we know is happening, across our country and around the world. And that is, yes, kind of the political and the structural violence that Winnie spoke about on stage, that kind of Dwayne Wade spoke about on this stage earlier, that we see kind of with laws being passed that are directly harming, our trans kids, adult members of the LGBTQI+ community who are seeing kind of rights stripped away, kind of access stripped away, kind of the path toward real kind of equity and equality, more thorn-ridden. And yet we also have people who are standing up, pushing back against the retrenchment, pushing forward, and kind of trying to protect people kind of anywhere and everywhere, including in this city. And so I wonder if you could talk about kind of your work with the Anti-Violence Project, why it's so critical now, and how you see your work connected to everything that we heard from Kapana Jackson, Pedro, Felicia, and Ashley earlier.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I want to just first say how much I appreciate the fact that LGBTQI issues were included in this panel. So often we are pushing to remind people that LGBTQ issues are, in fact, issues of gender-based violence. At AVP, for folks who don't know, we've been around for 43 years, and we started as a response to hate violence in New York City, and immediately people came together to support each other as survivors and to advocate for change. And one of the first things the organization did was it opened up a hotline, which has been running to this day. We have a 24-hour bilingual hotline. What happened was immediately when the hotline was open, people began calling about intimate partner violence and sexual violence and all other forms of violence. So it was clear to the organization that all of these violences were interconnected and central in our community, and we need to talk about them and name that they were happening, and we needed to be advocating for LGBTQI survivors as a part of the conversation about gender-based violence. And what I say to people all the time is that most of the work of our organization is dealing with gender-based violence, whether it's about the most recent incident, horrific homicide of a young gay man, O'Shea Sibley, here in New York City, who was killed because he and his friends were proudly voguing in a gas station parking lot. They were attacked because their gender presentation didn't match what other people thought a man should act like. Whether it's, I think about the homicide of a young trans woman, Elon Nettles, in 2013, who was hanging out with friends at night and approached by a group of men who thought they were cute. And the young men started talking to them, and then one of the men turned to his friend and said, "That's not really a woman." And he was so embarrassed and ashamed by being attracted to a trans woman that he attacked her and killed her. That's gender-based violence. And so this is the kind of violence that our community is dealing with every day. And we are constantly not only dealing with that violence and that onslaught, as you talked about, the increasing in numbers over and over, year after year. But now we are also dealing with this institutional violence where our communities are being attacked in our courthouses across the country and our state houses. And this is happening across the globe as well. At AVP, we represent many, many asylum seekers who are coming to this country because they're dealing with violence in their own countries and coming here looking for community and to be safe, and often, again, are dealing with violence here as well. So we're being attacked on all sides and from all fronts. And we want to make sure that we are included in this conversation because we need the resources and the attention and the time and the energy from this community to really paying attention to this violence and helping us address it together.
Yeah, and I think, Beverly, that's a good segue to now kind of moving to what is working, kind of on the different bases in which kind of each of you are kind of heroically trying to help kind of protect people today and move us forward. And so I wonder, Kapana, again, if we can just start with you, and you can share kind of when the data has been sufficiently compelling to the local leaders and when you've had to kind of maybe position it in such a way to prompt people to act, or when you've had to hold people accountable when they didn't do the right thing the first time. But, as my grandmother would say, it's never too late to do the right thing. So curious kind of just what you can share that could be helpful as other people here are thinking about how they might be using data in their own kind of communities or kind of countries, or if they work with Safety Pin, understanding how they might best kind of work with you to effectively and efficiently advocate in their own spaces and places.
Thank you. I think data, it can be very compelling when you combine quantitative data with stories. And I think that's what we need to learn to do, because the stories brings alive the numbers. Sometimes the numbers are don't reflect enough, but the numbers are needed to really get the lawmakers, the policymakers to make those changes. So when you say 80% of women have faced their first sexual harassment before the age of 12, that's a very compelling statistic that you have to act upon. But the stories, like the ones that you talked about, are also really needed. And I think one of the things that, as at Safety Pin, we've realized, along with addressing gender-based violence and sexual harassment, the other point that we really needed to unpack, and it came to life during the COVID pandemic, is the work of care. Because unless cities and governments begin to design services, design policies recognizing the work of care, it is never going to be equal or equitable. For example, in India, what we're finding, it's really an unusual trend, is that women are dropping out of the workforce. And why are they dropping out of the workforce? It is violence, but it's also lack of good transportation, it's lack of good public spaces, it's lack of sexual harassment laws within the organization. So we need to recognize that the impact of violence goes much beyond the actual act of violence. It impinges on your right to education, your right to employment, your right to well-being, your right to leisure. And I think that we have to take the data, we have to speak to the right people, and we have to make sure that we center stage the work of care, because as long as that is kept invisible, we won't actually have equity in our cities, in our countries. Thank you.
And Jackson, I wonder too if you could share what you found to be effective when you're helping men who may really care about this kind of issue, but have never thought that it was their issue. Like what has worked to help you convince other men that they need to center themselves in understanding bluntly the challenge and also the solutions?
Thank you. We need to make this mandatory. This can't be optional. I mean, I was a student activist when I was in college a long time ago. I was once a young man, and I was saying the same things that I'm saying now when I was 19, 20 years old. You know, my clothes weren't as nice and my hair was a lot longer back then, but it was the same message, and I was done with it as a 20-year-old, making this optional, organizing men's groups and hoping that men would show up, have a meeting in the campus center on Tuesday night at 7 o'clock, and me and one or two others waiting for people to show up. I'm done with that. I think we need to, I was done with it a long time ago. We need to make it mandatory, and if you don't want to use the word mandatory, I'll use the word, we need to build it in organically into normative educational practice and institutional practice, and if you want to be a leader, if you're a person, you want to be a leader, and I'm saying person because everybody can be a leader, but in this case, the way to get men through the door is say, this is not an option, this is something that we expect of you as a leader if you want to be, for example, athletics, right? I've been working in athletics. I created the first, system-wide and large-scale gender violence prevention program in college athletics and professional athletics, in the US military. These are all fairly traditional organizations with a lot of male dominance, but the issue, I mean, when the mainstream person is thinking about, like, say, for example, athletics, they think about the student athletes. They'll say, all these student athletes have, they're full of themselves. They have all this entitlement. And I'm not going to debate that in this moment. But it's not about the student athletes. They have the least power in the system. The people who have the most power are the coaches, the athletic administrators, the presidents of the university. In professional leagues, it's not the players, although to a certain extent the players have a whole lot of power, but it's the leagues, the officials. Look at what happened with the Spanish women's soccer team. I mean, the Spanish women's soccer team, which is Bonobo Principle Exhibit A, right? The women organized and said, we're not going to play for this team or for this organization, and the whole country of Spain was under a critical spotlight, and that pushed the leadership. But if the leadership had initially been expected to be, progressive, pro-woman and pro-gender equality leadership from the beginning, it would never have happened. And somebody who's in the position that did what he did wouldn't even have been in that position if he wasn't, in other words, if he didn't pass muster as a leader. So I would say we have to embed in organizations, in the private sector, in the public sector, in government, and everywhere, the expectation that if you want to be a leader, you have to be trained in gender violence prevention. And one of the ways that gender violence prevention connects to all these other issues, it's not just a siloed issue like sexual assault and domestic violence and harassment. Those are all important issues. But they're also incredibly marbled into every other issue, whether it's homelessness or alcohol and drug abuse, child abuse, obviously child sexual exploitation, gang violence, men's violence against other men. I mean, there's so many issues that are connected and interrelated. And by the way, we have to be also intersectional. I appreciate that. And I think it's important to say that even though these issues are universal in every community, from wealthy to poor, in every community in the world, really, there's also some nuance that we have to have in cultural competence to talk about solutions, because solutions aren't cookie cutter, because we have to be ethnically and racially and otherwise complexifying in our thinking about it. Last thing is that it's the vast majority of men and young men who commit abuse, again, men's abuse towards women, are not sick sociopaths. They're otherwise normal guys. And we have to talk about why are otherwise, quote unquote, normal guys doing these things. So many men who commit acts of abuse against women don't see themselves as having committed any criminal act or even anything wrong. And to that extent, we have to talk about what are we doing in the various institutions of our society to create and perpetuate these norms that so many men and young men think that what they're doing is normal. And that means talking about the pornography culture. It means talking about, pornography is so unbelievably implicated in the sexual violence pandemic. And anybody who hasn't been paying attention to what's been happening in porn culture, in heterosexual porn, it's just like rape on film. And Ashley referenced this, I'll miss my last point. Ashley referenced this in her talk. Choking is the word that the porn industry uses. It's strangulation, and it's become completely normalized in porn. And I talk to people all over the United States and other parts of the world who are in the domestic violence space, and strangulation is an extraordinarily common thing. And the young men who are strangling women while they're having sex with them, unknown to the women in most cases, in other words, suddenly starting to strangle them, those guys think that that's what normal sex looks like. So if we're going to talk about changing norms, we have to, if we want to talk about changing the widespread pandemic of men's violence, we have to talk about all of us who are in a position to influence norms and change those norms.
And have and start and be in sometimes uncomfortable conversations, because what you just described is far less comfortable than just sitting in space with a little bit of discomfort. And so if we really want to do something, many somethings, we have to kind of have an ongoing honest reckoning. So I certainly appreciate, Jackson, your fast New Yorker speaking. Beverly, speaking about New York, I do hope that you can share too kind of what, if anything, you've seen at the Anti-Violence Project to disrupt cycles of violence, to help people better understand maybe the harm that they've inflicted and to take responsibility and kind of be in kind of restorative spaces to heal and move forward. Kind of, I know we spoke about the need to kind of build kind of and support and highlight different leadership from men and to not have to focus on building resilience into girls, but we kind of do until we don't need it any longer. And so kind of what have you seen kind of that works kind of with minimal harm and kind of the resilience work kind of for your community? Just again, like if we're in these last few minutes, we've spoken so much about our enormous, deep kind of structural, existential challenges, and also now some of what we're seeing work. So what have you seen work, and kind of what more would you like to see invested in to kind of continue that work?
Well, a couple of things. I'll try to be quick because I know we don't have that much time. I would say one of the things that I think is really powerful about the work that we do at AVP is that because we do very deep local work, we are supporting survivors on the ground. We use that work to translate that into policy and advocacy and data, so that it's not, we're not just advocates kind of talking about theories, but we are actually bringing survivors into the conversation, making decisions about what it should be prioritized and bringing those to decision makers. And so we are seeing, from the ground, leadership development. We do a lot of investing of leadership development of community members, particularly trans folks and gender non-conforming folks. And that has been really powerful to bring their voices, their leadership to the front where they should be. We have also been doing some really deep research looking at the whole landscape of this violence. And we actually just released a report looking at violence that is being committed against LGBTQ safe spaces, where now it's not enough to attack our bodies, but our spaces are also under attack. And so bringing that into this conversation as well, that we actually now have to think about how do we shore up those spaces, because those spaces are where survivors go to access the services that they need. And when those spaces are under attack, there are no places left, or there may be no places left in some communities where people can be safe and be themselves. So we are bringing together folks to look at those safe spaces. We had a really great project this summer where we asked members of Congress to go visit an LGBTQ safe space in their community, in their district. And we had these great in-district visits where people, again, people who are in a position to be leaders are raising their voices and saying this violence has to end. And then finally, I will say that bringing together folks across communities to look at violence together has been really powerful for us. And we know that while the LGBTQ community is under attack, our issues are linked to issues of women dealing with violence in the street. Our issues are linked to other communities that are under attack, and that we understand that our enemies are the same, that we are seeing the rhetoric of white supremacist organizations and the empowerment of those organizations underlying all of what we are facing. And so we all have to be united in facing the violence together.
You know, I think that for so long, women and girls, members of the LGBTQI+ community, have been asked to disbelieve not only what we've seen, but what we've experienced. And that kind of cognitive and spiritual dissonance has been, I think, too long kind of ignored as also a kind of underlying force here. And I think, thankfully, we have more people, certainly, Ashley, Pedro, Felicia, but also, Beverly, Jackson, Kalpana, and many of you who are, not only naming the challenges and architecting and driving toward real solutions to help better protect people today and communities in the future, but also ensuring that we can have a cognitive and emotional and spiritual coherence in a way that I find really powerful. And so, Jackson, you committed to be on the main stage next year. I won't forget that. And I certainly won't forget this conversation, and I hope all of you leave feeling a little bit more urgent and a little bit more hopeful because of the leaders with us on the stage today. Thank you.